Namaste to everyone. This is Indian History class number 19 and weekend number 20 of Mahabharat series. In the last class, that is weekend number 19 of Mahabharat and Indian History class number 18, we have discussed about the polity, the second class of polity of the ancient India. So if you see the ancient India period from 600 BC to around 600 AD, in the first class of polity, we discussed about the rise of Mahajanapadas and then the rise of Mauryan Empire and how the rise of Ashoka happened. We discussed all this in the first class. In the last class, we discussed about the remaining polity of that period. We started with in the last class, just a small recapitulation. In the last class, we have started with the administration of the Mauryan Empire. And then we discussed about the Mauryan Empire was from 327 BC to around 185 BC. And after that, from 200 BC, we have seen after Mauryans, the rise of in the deep south, the rise of the Cholas, Pandyas and Cheras. They are the chiefdoms, we have discussed them. And that is the deep south, in the Tamil Nadu region. And in the central India and western India, that is the Maharashtra region, Madhya Pradesh region, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh region, the rise of the Shatavahanas happened from 200 BC. We have discussed that. And then in the region of northwestern and western, we have seen the rise of the Shakas. Especially Shakas ruled the Gujarat region of the India from 200 BC. We have discussed them. And in the last class, we also discussed from the central India, so this is where somewhere the central India lies, not India, the central Asia. So 5 different countries, the Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan and the Kazakhstan. So from central Asia through the Afghanistan and the northwestern Indian subcontinent. This is the northwestern Indian subcontinent. Even the Pakistan was also part of India then. So this period, this complete region from 100 BC was under the empire of Kushanas. So these Kushanas ruled from actually Afghanistan. The central point of them was Afghanistan. So from 100 BC we have seen the rise of the Kushanas. Kushanas ruled the Central Asia and the Afghanistan region and the northwestern Indian subcontinent, and till this extended till Uttar Pradesh and the Delhi, Punjab and Rajasthan regions. Kushanas ruled over this area. And then at the end of our last class, we have discussed about the rise of Guptas, the Gupta Empire. Gupta Empire rose on the remnants of the Magadha Empire. So Bihar was actually the heartland of this Magadha Empire, Mauryan Empire, and after that, the second Indian largest empire after Mauryans, that was the Gupta Empire. So Gupta Empire started in the Bihar at around 300 AD and it also ruled almost the northern part of the India. This is what we have discussed in the last class. That is the polity section of the ancient India from 600 BC to 600 AD. Now, today, this is Indian History class number 19. As I have said, we are going to discuss about the economy portion. We have completed with the polity. So who ruled over this complete India in that period, 600 BC to 600 AD. First we have seen the rise of Mahajanapadas in the Bihar area, and then we have seen the rise of the Magadha state, Mahajanapada, and on the remnants of them came the first empire called as the Mauryan Empire. Mauryan Empire ruled the first almost northern India, entire northern India, at least till even Afghanistan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, till it ruled complete northern Indian subcontinent, Mauryan Empire. But the heartland was Bihar. That is Bihar. And after that we have seen the rise of Cholas, Pandyas and Cheras in the Tamil Nadu region. At the same time, from 200 BC, the rise of Shatavahanas in the western and central India. And then in the same time, Cholas, Cheras, Pandyas, here Shatavahanas, and in the Gujarat area we have seen the rise of the Shakas. And from 100 BC, the rise of the Kushanas, who ruled over the northern Indian subcontinent, northern western Indian subcontinent. And then the second largest empire called as the Gupta Empire rose here in the 300 AD, and with the fall of the Gupta Empire, ancient India will be completed. So we have discussed the complete polity. Today we are going to discuss about the economy of this ancient India, economy portion of the ancient India. So from 600 BC again to 600 AD, how the economy was actually changing. How the economy was changing. So this economy portion of ancient India will be dealt in two classes, and today this is the first class of economy of ancient India, and in this class we will discuss about the rural economy of ancient India, rural side economy, how the rural economy changed from Vedic period to this ancient Indian period, that is 600 BC to 600 AD, and after that how it initiated some changes in the rural society of the ancient India. So let us discuss the rural economy of ancient India today. Yes. So today we are going to discuss the topic, that is the ancient rural economy. So rural economy, actually this is very important, sir, because the economy that we are going to discuss is actually can be studied in two different ways. One is differentiating the complete society into rural and urban, and then studying each unit differently. So in the ancient India, if you see, the first urbanization on the land of India was happened during the period of Indus Valley civilization, but that never sustained. We have not seen a continuous generations of Indus Valley people, but sudden disruption happened. We don't know why that civilization got declined, and suddenly early Vedic period emerged in the valley of Ganga. So we cannot take it for granted that Indus Valley civilization was actually continued as Vedic period. So something happened in between. We discussed everything in the previous classes. So from Vedic period, if you see, from 1500 BC to 1000 BC, and in the latter Vedic period also, from 1500 BC to around 600 BC, most of the Vedic period was actually rural in nature. We discussed it. Completely rural in nature. We never saw the rise of great cities like in the period of Indus Valley civilization or after the Vedic period. We never saw such cities coming up in the Vedic period. Yes, towards the latter end of the latter Vedic period, we have found some new capital cities coming up, but especially the core of the Vedic period was rural in nature. We discussed it. So from latter Vedic period to the next period that we are going to discuss, that is 600 BC to 600 AD. At 600 BC, latter Vedic period ends, as we have discussed, and we start discussing the ancient Indian period from 600 BC to 600 AD. That is the ancient Indian period or early Indian period. In that, in the last three classes, we discussed the polity. So who ruled complete India over that period, and today we are discussing the economy. In that, this is the first class. As this is the first class of economy of ancient India, we are going to discuss the rural economy. This is very, very important. So we are going to discuss only the rural side of the countryside of the economy of ancient India during this period. And in the next coming classes, in the next weekend we discuss the urban economy. Okay. Now, ancient Indian rural economy can be studied under these heads. These are the 6 important heads that we are going to discuss today, and with these our class will be coming to a conclusion today. First we will discuss that how the countryside means complete rural people. From 600 BC we have discussed the rise of Mahajanapadas. After that Mauryan Empire, Magadhan state, after that Mauryan Empire, and then came the latter Mauryans, post-Mauryan period. And then after that we have seen the rise of lot of Shatavahanas, Shakas, Kushanas, lot of dynasties, lot of kingdoms had come. And ultimately by 300 AD they culminated into Gupta Empire. So all these people were ruling in this period, 600 BC to 600 AD. But how the rural side of the population was actually feeling, and how changes were triggered with the change in polity, especially change in polity triggers change in society and the economy. and vice versa. Change can be initiated in any domain, and that will trigger a chain of reactions in other domains of the society. So we discussed the political changes, how it happened from Janas of early Vedic period to Janapadas of latter Vedic period. From Janapadas of latter Vedic period to the next, that is the Mahajanapadas of this period, and then Mauryan Empire, after that states, and then Gupta empires. So how this evolution of polity happened, in the same way economy also changes, evolution happens normally. Now, sir, as I have said, if you are a king, you just imagine yourself as a king and start, feeling that how in different periods you would have thought. In every Vedic period, if you are a Rajan, actually you were to be elected by people itself. So people used to elect the king, and that the same Rajan concept, the same Raja, in the latter Vedic period was elected differently. How? He was not no more elected by the people in the latter Vedic period. The king, if he was powerful, he was to perform a Ashwamedha Yaga. He is to let a horse freely, and wherever it goes, all land should be claimed by the king. And if one has to stop the horse, that means he has to fight with me. Either he wins or me. And the winner will be the new ruler of the other area. This is how the change of kingship happened from early Vedic period to latter Vedic period. And if I am king in the latter Vedic period who claimed the land through Ashwamedha Yaga, that has changed completely when we saw the period 600 BC, after 600 BC. That is the after Vedic period. This is the period of ancient India, early political history. So now at this point in the time period, what happened? Mahajanapadas has come. Mahajanapadas were rose out of Janapadas of Vedic period. And then from the Mahajanapadas, now I became too powerful. If I was the king, during the Mahajanapadas period, I was too powerful because I was having a capital city, I was having a regular army, and even I was fortifying my complete capital city. So monarchy was strengthened after 600 BC. So if I was the king, I was becoming more and more powerful. If you see from early Vedic period to latter Vedic period, and from latter Vedic period to this ancient or early Indian period. And if you see after Mahajanapadas to the period of Mauryan Empire, if I was the king, now I was elevated as an emperor. For example, if I was Ashoka, I was more powerful than the king of Mahajanapada. And so like this, if you see the evolution, political evolution, the power of the king was increasing from early Vedic period to at least till the ancient Indian Gupta Empire, the second largest empire. With the fall of Gupta Empire, we conclude ancient India. So if I was the king, my power was becoming more and more important, more and more broader. That means whose power, actually, if I was increasing in my power, that means someone's power, someone's rights were being suppressed. Yes or no? So normally if I am powerful than others, that means others are powerless than me in converse. So that's what, that other dimension, other view of the society, today we are going to discuss in the economy portion. So in the last two classes we discussed the political rise, political evolution, how Rajan became Raja or king, Raja became the emperor. This evolution we have seen. And today we are going to see how the ancient rural economy, and inside that rural economy who resides? Not the kings. In the rural side who resides? The people, the masses. So today we are going to discuss the life of those masses. That is what the economy which tells the status of life of the people. That's what we are going to discuss. So this is the rural economy of ancient India. This is the part 1, first class, rural economy. And tomorrow the next class, next weekend, we will discuss the urban economy. First, listen, now here starts our class. If you see by 600 BC, in the latter Vedic period when I was dealing, towards the end of the latter Vedic period, I have said some points that most of the common people were not happy with the kingdoms and were not happy with the kings. and the way they are ruling? Yes or no? Even the Brahmanical dominance was on the rise by 600 BC, towards the end of this latter Vedic period, towards the 600 BC. We have seen the Brahmanical dominance, and against that there was huge resentment in the common people, as I have said. So in the same way, not only between Brahmins and other sections, even between the kings and the people, there was a lot of differences of opinion, differences of conflicts of interest have come by 600 BC. So now let us discuss first how the countryside, that is the rural Indian masses, were changing their opinions. This is what that we are going to discuss. The changing countryside. That means by 600 BC, because the power of the king was increasing in exponentially, people were not happy. Why? Not because the power of king was increasing, but because they are feeling powerless. So let us discuss how this countryside was actually changing their opinions. First point let us discuss in this heading, changing countryside. So after 600 BC, if you go to a village of ancient India, any kingdom, maybe let us take Mahajanapadas. After 600 BC, at least till 300 BC, we have Mahajanapadas. So if you go to a Mahajanapada village, inside that village, and ask a common man about what you think about your king, what do you think about your king, and if you study the relation between the king and subjects, this is very important, sir. The king and the subjects, the relation between the king and subject. Subject means who is subject? A subject is actually a common man in the kingdom who was not having any rights on his own. So the relationship between king and the subject was straining. It was not good. This is the first important point. By 600 BC, the relationship between the king and the subjects of the ancient Indian kingdoms was not good enough. It was strained relationship between the king and the subjects. This is what actually the change, because if you see in the early Vedic period, people themselves were electing, as I have said, the king or the Rajan. That means they are happy with the king. Relatively they are happy. But by 600 BC, when we studied the rural economy of ancient India, in every village you will see people are not happy with the kings. It tells that the relationship between the king and the subjects was strained. Why? The question here is why the relationship is strained. Why not happy? Why people are not happy? Because 600 BC, this is very, very turning point in the history of India. By 600 BC, you will see the introduction of the tax. So this is the reason why the relationship between king and the subject was not good enough. Understood? So this introduction of the tax at 600 BC is the primary reason that why actually the people or the subjects are not happy with the king. This is what happening in the countryside, the rural side. So now, when this tax was introduced, actually before 600 BC, if you see, the tax was not imposed, it was not forcibly collected. It was only voluntary tax called as bali. You might have, I have told you that bali. What is meant by bali? Bali was a voluntary tax. People themselves were giving to the kings till 600 BC. But after 600 BC, you will see the tax was collected forcibly. That's why the people are not happy with the king. They are not happy with the king. That's what the change in perception of the countryside. Now, so this was the scenario in every village. So normally when a king was actually forcibly collecting the taxes from the common people or the masses, you will see a popular belief or a popular perception develops in the common people against the kings. Yes or no? Normally, if authoritarianism was on increase or if monarchy was on rise, normally the countryside people would mobilize themselves and develop a public opinion. So let us understand. So in this scenario, when the king and subject relationship was not happy because of the introduction of the tax, what was actually the popular perception of the king? Popular perception of the kings. So in the rural side of the ancient kingdoms between this period 600 BC to 600 AD, how the people were thinking and feeling or opined, how the people have their opinions or perceptions about the kings. Let us discuss. This is the changing countryside perception we have discussed. Changing countryside, how it was changing because of the introduction of the taxation. Because of that, the people are not happy with the king. So the relationship between the king and the people was on decline. And now, because of as a consequence of that introduction of taxation, there was a popular perceptions developed against the king in the people. So let us discuss what are those popular perceptions of the kings. So to know, here I have to just stop here and ask you a question. If I have to know about a king, till the last class, how we have known? We have known through the inscriptions. We have come to know about a king, about Ashoka, because of the Ashoka inscriptions. But if I have to know that how common people were actually having the perception about the king, what they are thinking about the kings, how could I know? So to know that, actually there are a lot of challenges. We can know about a king, we can know about the capital cities of the ancient India, we can know about a lot of greater things, but about a common people and common people life, we cannot know so easily. So there are lot many challenges existing to know that how common people are actually thinking about the kings. So there are mainly two important challenges. Which actually stops us from reaching the viewpoint of the common people. What are they? Let us see. See, normally when I have to study about a king, what I would study as a historian, Indian historian, what I would study? I would study the inscriptions. Yes or no? So here the challenge is, inscriptions never tell about the common people perception. Yes or no? Why? Because inscriptions, who will commission these inscriptions? The king or the emperor would commission them. So normally when a king, if I was a king, if I commission an inscription, I don't consider the popular belief of the people, but I would commission it in the favor of me normally. I don't consider the other views normally. So that becomes the first challenge. Whatever the inscriptions we found between this period, 600 BC to 600 AD, on those inscriptions you can study about the polity. By studying them, by examining them, you can reach to the polity of the ancient India, but you can never know as a historian about the common people perception about the kings. So inscriptions cannot tell about the common people's perception. So that becomes a very grand challenge to the Indian historians. So we cannot know anything about common people through inscriptions. Now, second important challenge is, sir, if I was a king, or at least if I was a Brahmin of this period, if I was a Brahmin belonging to 600 BC to 600 AD, at least I would have studied the Vedas and I would have known the Sanskrit language, writing and reading. So I was, in general, I expected to be a literate if I was a Brahmin. But the common people, we are speaking about the common people perception about the kings. So from here actually starts how the economy was changing. That's why I am telling all these things. So if I was to speak about the common people perception, they are illiterates. Yes or no? They are not Brahmins to write or record their thoughts and experiences about the kings. So they are illiterates. Because they are illiterates, common people or ordinary people never left any accounts of their thoughts and experiences. So we never found any direct evidence, direct records of the ordinary people most of the times during this period. So that becomes the second important challenge in studying the common people or the popular perception of the people about the kings. Yes or no? In the first point we have discussed that the relationship between king and the people was actually on the decline by 600 BC because of the introduction of the taxation. And in the second point, I am telling you that there are some challenges to study actually what common people are thinking about the king. The two important challenges are the inscriptions which were commissioned by the kings never tell about common people perceptions. First challenge. And second challenge is the ordinary people, because they are illiterates, they never wrote, they never maintained their own accounts of their thoughts and experiences. So how can we know? Now the question, how can we know about the common people's perception about the kings? How? If you are an Indian historian, how to find that? How you can find that? How you can reach the common people view? So here comes the actual historical reconstructive tools. Not only inscriptions, not only written records, but there are some other tools were to be referred to know how actually the poorer section of the society of this period was thinking. What are their thoughts? What is their lifestyle? What is their belief or the popular perception against the kings? So what are those tools? Let us see now. So normally, as I am saying, they are common people. We are discussing about the rural economy. So because they are common people, they normally in the rural side, what they do? They go to agriculture. So when they go to agricultural fields, for example, let us imagine a situation where a village people were going into agricultural field and they are practicing the transplantation of paddy. You can expect and imagine that every worker and the group of workers or the laborers, they would enjoy the work or at least to enjoy the work, they would sing some songs. You know it, right? In the rural side, even till today you will see that. Normally they sing some songs. They compose orally certain stories and they will sing them during their work. And here comes the actual source to study what they are thinking about the kings. And they are the anthologies. So not the inscriptions, not the written records, but the anthologies are actually the sources. The anthologies are the sources to study about the popular perception of the people's perception about the king. Anthologies means collection of the poems, collection of the songs, collection of musical, poetry. So they go to the fields and they sing them. And that's how historians will look to them and they will examine the anthologies, the poems they sing, the oral poems. In the latter periods, they were written down. Towards the end of the ancient Indian period, those anthologies were written down. But in the starting of the 600 BC, they were never written down because they are common people, they are illiterates. So historians will look to the anthologies. So anthologies are actually the source to study about the common people's perception about the kings. Now, what does anthologies consist of? So I am a historian. I found certain anthologies. Anthologies means collection of the poems or collection of the songs, etc. Poems and songs. Not only poems and songs, even anthologies consist of stories. So this is very, very important. Stories. They consist of the stories. So normally you will see in every village, the older people would tell certain stories to the younger people. Yes or no? In the form of songs, in the form of couplets or the 4-line songs, etc. Simple songs. So these stories are actually the tools to study the popular perception of the people about the kings. So for example, there are two important stories belonging to this period. They are the Jatakas. And the Panchatantra. So the Jataka stories and the Panchatantra stories belong to this period, ancient rural countryside. So these Jataka stories and the Panchatantra stories, normally they reveal in the stories you will have lot many characters and each character will be representing one or other section of the society, and indirectly they will tell what they are thinking about the kings and etc. So there are Jataka stories and there are Panchatantra stories. So there are two examples I have given. Like that, there are lot many stories. There are oral compositions. Normally they would sing when they are doing work, and they reveal about how the people are actually perceiving about the king. What is the perception of the people against the king? They will tell. So let me give you an example. One such Jataka is the Ganda Tindu Jataka. Ganda Tindu Jataka. So this is very important, sir. This Ganda Tindu Jataka. This is one of the Jataka story. In that story, I will narrate you the story, and you will understand how people actually are thinking about the kings. This Ganda Tindu Jataka story, it tells about the plight, it tells about the pain, it tells about the agony or the miseries of the people against a wicked king. So this Ganda Tindu Jataka story tells there was a king. He was very wicked in nature, very bad personality. He never cares about the people. And this story tells about how people were thinking about that king. And that reflects how actually ancient rural people are thinking about the kings of ancient India. Through the stories they reveal that. In the Ganda Tindu Jataka story, as I have said, there is a wicked king. So one day that king wanted to know how the common people are thinking about him. I'm telling the story, the Ganda Tindu Jataka story. So that bad king or the wicked king, he once goes to the villages in disguise. Disguise means in a different attires, to not reveal himself as a king. In different dress and different makeup, he goes to the village. And he will listen what actually the people are thinking about the king. He will listen. And surprisingly, the Ganda Tindu Jataka story, inside that, what it tells was, when the king goes to the people in disguise and listens about him, what they are thinking about, he was very shocked to know that actually people are cursing him. People are never happy. They were cursing the king for all their miseries. For all the miseries, they are cursing the king. And not only that, he listened, the king in disguise listened that people were actually telling, they are comparing the tax collectors of the king, who actually sent by the king to the villages to collect the taxes. They are comparing these tax collectors with the robbers. They are saying, the people were saying, discussing among themselves, that robbers would attack them in the nights, whereas the tax collectors would attack them in the daytime. That's what they are thinking about the king and their subordinates, like tax collectors. They are comparing the tax collectors with the robbers. And they are, with helplessness, they are saying that robbers are attacking them in the night and tax collectors are attacking them in the daytime. That's what the people were actually perception about the king. And not only that, if you see, most of the people, most of the villages, the wicked king, as the Ganda Tindu Jataka says, the wicked king was observed two important reactions from the people for this taxation. Two important reactions. One set of people in the village, rural sections of the society, they completely escaped the kingdom itself. The problem of taxation, they never want to face it. And most of the people in the rural side, they fled the kingdom itself. They fled the kingdom, they fled the capital cities, they fled the rural side, and they went deep into the forests. That was the popular perception about the kings. Because of the introduction of the taxation at 600 BCE, some section of the rural society fled the complete kingdom. They fled and they went deep into the forests.
This is one set of the society, one section of the rural society, which the victim king was observed. People were fleeing the villages, people were abandoning the villages, and they are going into the deep forest. And if he stops one of them and asks why you are going, why you are fleeing the village, they would say the victim king, as the Gandatindu Jataka says, they would say that the king was not, kind. The king was not taking care of the people. That's why they are going out of the kingdoms because of unbearable pain of the taxation. That's what the popular reaction from the rural side of the society to the taxation system of the kings introduced in the 600 BC to 600 AD in that period. This is the one side of the people who fled. People were fled from the kingdoms. And the second set of the rural section, they did not flee. They did not completely flee out of the kingdom, but they responded to the king's taxation demands in an innovative way. Innovative way. For example, if I am living in a village, if suddenly the monarchy was on rise and the king was demanding taxation from me and my produce, I have two options to do. One was the first option I have explained. I would leave the village, I would abandon the village and go deep into the forest, so that I was not to pay any tax to anybody. I was out of the kingdom. That was one option. And another option is to stay inside the village and pay the tax in some or the other way. How? So this is the second reaction of the people to the kingdom's taxation, which was explained in the Gandatindu Jataka story. All this is a story. A victim king was there. A king goes to the people in a disguise and he listens what the people are saying and discussing about king. And with this story, with this character of victim king and all the villagers, Gandatindu Jataka was actually telling about the popular perception of the people against the king. So now let us see the second reaction of the rural people to the taxation. How they were, making themselves ready for the raising demands of taxation in the kingdom. How they are making themselves ready. See, most of the ancient Indian rural people, they responded, especially in the areas of Ganga river valley and the Kaveri river valleys, especially Ganga river valley, that means high rainfall areas. So now we discuss the popular perception of the kings. How it was there? They are not happy. People were not happy. They want to flee. They want to abandon the villages. They were going into the deep forest. And they are comparing the tax collectors with the robbers. This is what the popular perception of the people against the kings during this period about the economic policies of the kings. But some of the people, some of the rural sections responded very differently to the taxation demands, and they started changing the way of production in the agriculture. They started changing the way of production, the mode of production, so that the produce can be increased. That's what the second section of the rural society responded to the taxation. That's the way how they responded. So now they want to see, because the king was demanding tax on the produce. Now the rural people, how the rural economy was changing, just observe here. Rural people were bringing changes in the way they produce the crops. There are lot many strategies. They adopted. Lot many technological revolutions have come up in the rural society to meet the demands of the taxation. And what are the strategies? We will discuss what are the strategies. But why they are adopting the strategies? What is the main reason why rural people are adopting some agricultural practices? For increasing the production. This is the very, very important step. For increasing the production. Why? Only if the rural people increase the production, then only they would pay tax to the king. If not, the king and the tax collectors would harass the people. And those people who are unable to increase the production, they are fleeing and abandoning the villages. And some of the villagers, some of the rural section, wantedly to increase the production, they were adopting certain strategies. So now let us discuss what are some of the strategies which were adopted by the rural people to meet the demands of the taxation of the king. Sir, one strategy, very important. There are four important strategies, agricultural strategies, technological revolutions, I can say, adopted in this ancient Indian period, especially in the countryside, that is the rural side, to meet the demand of the taxation of the king. So, one strategy is iron plowshare technology. Sir, very, very important. The first strategy is iron plowshare technology. So till 600 BC, we have evidence of using the plow to till the soil, but that plow was wooden in nature. In 1000 BC, so this is very important. 1000 BC, this is the time period at which iron was discovered. It was discovered in latter Vedic period, 1000 BC, but after 400 years, it came into prominence in use, and by 600 BC, iron plowshare was made, and that was started being used in the agriculture. This is the first strategy the rural people used to increase the production. Why to increase the production? To meet the demand of the taxation of the king. So king was actually started the taxation. In this period, the kings were demanding the taxes. So to meet the taxation, they have to increase the production. The rural side people were to increase the production, and to increase the production, they were adopting certain strategies. And one such strategy is adopting the iron plowshare technology. And iron plowshare technology, why? Why people adopted iron plowshare technology? Yes, this is okay to increase the production, but what is the need of shifting from wooden plow to iron plow? Iron plowshare technology. Sir, if you see ancient Indian history, after 600 BC, the rise of Mahajanapadas and afterwards every empire, it was in the valley of Ganga and Yamuna, especially Ganga. So Ganga river is the center of all the next coming periods. The complete northern India. So because the area was fertile with the Ganga river, most of the soil was of clay. The type of soil was clay soil. So listen, this is very important. Why iron plowshare technology? Why they shifted from wood to iron? Most of the soil was clay in nature. Because of the clay nature, clay means very, very smaller in its size, and the minerals are very distinctive in nature. So because smaller in size, in 1 cubic meter of volume, you would have lot many soil particles compared to the sand or some other type of soil. That means it was very heavy soil. So a heavy soil and a clay soil present in the Ganga region, Ganga river fertile region, it cannot be tilled with a normal wooden plow, because clay soil would stick to the plow. So normally it is not possible to till a soil of clay nature, and that is the reason in the regions of only high rainfall. Sir, this point is very important. I am again repeating it. Only in the regions of high rainfall areas, for example Ganga river valley, for example Kaveri river valley, only in high rainfall areas we will find the clay soils, we will find the heavy soils, and to till the clay and heavy soils, the people were shifting from wooden plow to iron plowshare technology. For example, if you see other areas like Punjab and Rajasthan, they are not heavy rainfall areas. They are not heavy rainfall areas. They are semi-arid regions. So normally the soil there is not clay in nature. It was not clay in nature. It was not heavy soil. It is a loose soil. In Rajasthan you will see loose soil, and even in the Punjab also you will not see a clay and heavy soil, because the rainfall is not there. It was semi-arid region. That's the reason in Punjab and Rajasthan regions they never adopted this technology, iron plowshare technology. Only the heavy rainfall areas like Ganga Valley regions, etc., they adopted this iron plowshare technology. So with the adoption, shift from wooden plowshare technology to iron plowshare technology, there was an increase in the production they have seen, and because there was an increase in the production, they were able to meet the liability of tax which was levied by the king.
This is the one technology which they adopted, one strategy they adopted for increasing the production. Now, the second important technique, first important technique was shifting from wooden to iron plowshare technology, that too only in the heavy rainfall areas like UP, Bihar, Haryana, not even Haryana, UP, Bihar and Jharkhand, etc. that regions. But Punjab and Rajasthan region were never adopted iron plowshare technology. This is very important point. And now I am going to discuss the second important strategy. What is the second important strategy that rural people adopted for increasing the production? It is the transplantation of paddy. So this is very, very important. Till 600 BC, you will see in the rural side, agriculture was actually paddy, especially paddy, was being broadcasted. The seeds of paddy were broadcasted. It is one of the way of sowing the seeds. But by 600, after 600 BC, you will see there is a change in the way the plants are planted, the sowing of plants. They have been shifted from broadcasting of seeds in the field directly to transplantation technique. So what is this transplantation of paddy? First, at their home itself, they used to grow the smaller saplings of paddy, and they would take them to the field which was already waterlogged, and directly they would place them. This was transplantation. So this in Telugu we call it as natu. నాట్లేయడం అంటారు కదా అది. So this transplantation of the paddy, this technology revolutionized the production. This increases the production of paddy to a very enormous levels. Why? It is because of the transplantation of the paddy technique. Now the number of saplings or paddy saplings which are surviving are more compared to the broadcasting paddy plants. So this is transplantation of the paddy is the second technique which the rural people adopted to increase the agricultural production, so that they can meet the taxation demands of the kings of ancient India. This is the second strategy the people adopted. First strategy was iron plowshare technology. Second strategy was transplantation of the paddy. Now, the third important strategy which rural people adopted to increase the production is the hoe agriculture. Hoe agriculture. Hoe means, what is mean by hoe? Actually, hoe is nothing but just it's like a stick, a smaller stick. And this hoe agriculture is practiced only in the hilly areas, especially the northeastern India and the central India. Northeastern India and central India. So on the hilly terrain, if you see, you cannot broadcast or even you cannot transplant them. What you can do is this hoe technology, means with a small but stiff stick, they used to they used to just till the soil like that on the spot, and they used to place the seed on the hilltop, on the hill slope. Just they used to disturb the soil with the stick, and in that small hole they used to place the seeds of the paddy or some other crop. And that's what the hoe technology means. And this hoe technology, hoe agriculture, actually helped the hilly people, hilly areas like the northeastern India and central India to increase the production. This is what the rural people were doing to increase the production to meet the demands of the taxation. Now the fourth important technique, first important strategy they adopted was iron plowshare. Second one was transplantation of the paddy. Third strategy to increase the production was the hoe agriculture. And the fourth but very, very important strategy adopted was irrigation. This is very, very important, sir. Irrigation technology. Sir, in the period of crisis, people should search for opportunities. As this statement is true, actually the people of ancient Indian period, they are also, the rural people, they are also actually implementing it. That was the crisis period for them, because the monarchy was on the rise, the power of the king was on the increase. So normally the rural people were feeling powerless, they are being looted, lot of taxes were levied on them. So it was a crisis period to say for a common man, for a poor person in the villages. But in that crisis period, these people responded to the crisis and they made it as an opportunity by founding new strategies so that they can increase the production. So just imagine how beautifully they are responding to the crisis. Rural people, they started iron plowshare technology. That was a new invention. They started transportation of paddy technology, new invention. Third one was co-agriculture, new invention. Why they are shifting why they are changing the rural economy? It is because of the change in the polity that led to the change in the policies, and that in turn triggered the changes in the economy. So irrigation first was started with wells. First well irrigation was there. After 600 BC, you will see first wells were dug up in the fields for giving water to the plants. But as the time progressed from 600 BC to 600 AD, you will see change in the way of irrigation. For example, first well irrigation, after that tank irrigation. So there is a development in the way of irrigation also. So tank irrigation was started, and after that you will see the canal irrigation also. So these are the three important types of irrigation techniques or the strategies used by the rural people to increase the production to meet the demands of the taxation. What are they? Well irrigation, tank irrigation and canal irrigation. This is how the rural people are actually changing their countryside. This is why actually the people felt very badly about the kings because of the imposition of taxes. But some people escaped the kingdoms, some people fled the villages, abandoned the villages and went deep into the forest to escape themselves from the taxation. But some other people responded in this way by introducing new strategies like iron plowshare technology, transplantation of paddy, irrigation, agriculture. So these are the strategies they adopted for increasing the production. So ultimately what they did, they increased the production so that what happens? They would pay the taxes without much burden. This is how the strategies were adopted in the rural economy from 600 BC to 600 AD. Now, so it is going well. It's okay. So changing countryside we discussed. People are not happy. The relationship between king and people are not happy. Why? Because of taxation. So there was a popular belief that kings are not good. They are not taking care of the people. This belief was there in the people's mind. That is the reason to meet the taxation demand. They adopted lot of strategies, and they ultimately they increased the production so that they would meet the demand of taxation. So when this was happening in the rural side, in the countryside, inside the villages, first time transplantation of paddy happening, first time agriculture, first time irrigation technology was introduced. So when these changes were started in the rural side, normally these changes were led to the differences in the rural society. So this is very, very important point. Please listen carefully. In the rural society, inside a village you will see lot of communities. People would group themselves and form a village, and that village actually is the unit of rural society. So they are actually practicing all these production technologies. Yes or no? So when these changes were started in the rural economy, you would see in the society also some differences arose. How? Let us see how the differences arose in the countryside or the rural society. Sir, in every village till 600 BC, in every village you will see three types of communities. One community is completely landless agricultural laborers. They don't have land. So that is one section of the every village. In every village you will see these three people. One section is landless agricultural laborer, and the second section is small peasants.
small peasants. That means they will hold land, but a very smaller portion of the land. So smaller peasants are the second section of the every village, and the third section of every village would be large landowners. Large landowners. So you just imagine, till 600 BC, because the production was normal, all three were relatively living in harmony. There were no sharp differences between them. Landowners, smaller peasants, even the agricultural labor, they are living, not with sharper differences. But when the strategies were adopted and when the production was increasing, what happens? Who actually benefits out of these three? The large landowners started benefiting the most, and the landless laborers are still going deep into the poverty. Yes or no? So when this is the history's message. So please always remember, whenever technology improves, so this is very important message from history. Whenever the technology in the society improves, what technology does? It would increase the production and it would also increase the effectiveness of the economy. Till this point it is good. But if the fruits of the technological improvement, what are the fruits of the technological improvement? The increased production and the effectiveness. If the benefits or the fruits of the increased technology is not being distributed among all equally, not equally, at least evenly or uniformly. If at all the benefits of technology are not distributed between the communities equally or evenly or uniformly, what happens? That would lead to the differences or differentiation in the society. This is the history's message. So by 600 BC, a lot of strategies were adopted, production was increased. That's the reason large landowners were benefited the most, and the landless laborers were hurt. They were hurt to the maximum extent possible, and even the smaller peasants were hurt. So the differences between landless laborers, smaller peasants, and the large landholders, the differences became too sharper, and that's how the differences existed. Differences started coming up visible in every village. So change in polity led to the change in economy, and change in economy led to the way of production or production of in the economy, and that led in turn to the change in society. Yes or no? So now you will see clear distinction between a landless labor, a clear distinction between landless labor and smaller peasants and large landowners. You will see clear differences in every village after 600 BC. They are becoming still wealthier, the larger landowners, still richer, and these landless laborers are still becoming poor and poor. Smaller peasants are still becoming poor and poor because of uneven distribution of the technological improvement. This is what happening. Is that true? Is that true in the rural society? Is the differences between in every village, are the differences between the communities really improving, really sharpened or worsened? Yes, one evidence we have, and that is Tamil Sangam texts. So the Tamil Sangam texts, they would directly tell us, that is the direct evidence which were composed in the 600 to 600 AD Tamil Sangam text. They says in every village, in the Tamil Nadu area, in every village there are 3 communities in the village. This clearly says, Tamil Sangam text, there are 3 communities in the village, in every typical village. What are they? After 600 BC. One was the large landowners, and the Tamil Sangam text call these large landowners as the Vellalar. Vellalar means they are the large landowners. Vellalar. And this is the Vellalar section of the village. In every village you will see Vellalar. Vellalar means large landowners. And the smaller peasants, the Tamil Sangam text says, in every village there are some smaller peasants and they are called as Uzavars. Uzavars. Uzavars, Vellavars, Uzavars, and the landless laborers, and these are actually called as, landless laborers are called as Anaidi. So Vellavars, Uzavars and Anaidi, they are actually the three sections of every village you will see after 600 BC because of these changes in the rural society. So are you not thinking that this is the starting of caste system? Yes or no? This is the foundation. These changes which led to the differences in rural society were laying the foundation for caste system. So Vellalars and Uzavars and then the slaves, that is the Anaidis. So these are the differences that came in the rural society because of the increased production and because of the change in the rural economy. Now, sir, as I have discussed till now, popular perception about the kings was not good. People are not thinking good about the kings because of taxation. Some of the people, they fled the kingdoms and some others responded to the taxation and they adopted strategies like iron plowshare, transplantation, co-agriculture, irrigation, like that, and they ultimately increased the production. But this technological revolution, so only thing what the kings has done till now was only introduction of the taxation. But all the rest, the changing countryside perceptions and even the introduction of the new technological strategies and the evolving of natural differences in the rural society like Vellalars, Uzavars and then Adimais or the landless laborers, new sections, different sections of the villages were started evolving up. There, the bottom side changes, I can call them as. There was no active political imposition except the imposition of taxation. But even with the today contribution to the change in rural economy, the kings were started a new practice after 0 AD. From 0 AD especially we have the evidence, clear evidence. Maybe probably before that was also there. The practice of land grants. Land grants practice, who were giving, and what did land grants practice actually contributed to the rural economy, whether positively or negatively. If you have to study that, the main important thing is the practice of land grants led to a new section in the rural society, and that section was new rural elites. So those who are receiving the land as a grant from the king, they are becoming the elites in the rural society. Yes or no? So the land grants, how would we know? How actually we know that during this period 600 BC to 600 AD, the kings were actually giving lands as grants? How could we come to know that? If I am an Indian historian, what I look for actually to know about this, I look for the sources. So the source which tells this that kings were actually giving land grants was the inscriptions. So there were inscriptions inscribed or commissioned on the occasion of the land grants. Whenever a king was giving land as a grant to somebody, whether it is a Brahmana or some other body, king was actually to commission an inscription. Very rarely we can find land grant inscriptions on stones. On the stones, the land grants inscriptions were very rare. But most of the survived land grants inscriptions, if you see, they are on the copper plates. Not on the stones but on copper plates. So most of the land grant inscriptions, to study about this period's land grant practice, we found a lot of copper plates on which inscription was written, which tells that king or the queen, somebody was giving land as a grant to some other body. So inscriptions, especially the copper plates, are the main sources to study the land grants practice was there. Now, the language which is used in the inscriptions to to explain the land grant event, how the land grant was happened on that day. Most of the copper plates we have found, the copper plates which were dated back to 7th century, before 7th century, we found the language used on the copper plates, which was actually explaining about land grants, was Sanskrit. Before 7th century, we found Sanskrit inscriptions. But after 7th century, we found not only Sanskrit, along with the Sanskrit, on every copper plate, which explaining about the land grant event, we found the local language inscription also. For example, Telugu. For example, Tamil. So, on the copper plate inscriptions, we found Sanskrit and the languages like local languages after 7th century. So, this is what happening. So, with the copper plates only, inscriptions only, we could know that land grants practice was actually there. Okay? Now, a popular, if you study the legal texts like Manusmriti or the Narada Smriti, like that, the rules and regulations of the society, which was prescribed by the Brahmins during this period, 600 BC to 600 AD, most of the legal texts of ancient India, they say they have a rule that women, especially in the ancient India, women were not having the right or independent access to the land or any resources. Women were not having the access to land. This is the rule that Brahmins were put during this period through the legal texts. We have seen Manusmriti, and Manusmriti like that text tells women were not to give the access to the land. This is the general rule. But historians always look for exceptions also. Is that hold true for every woman in the society? Is really everyone was completely devoid of land access to the land or material resources? They cannot really, women are completely not having ownership of any land or any material. Is that true for everyone in the society of this period? When we see that, we found some exceptions also. For example, through the land grants event, we found some exception. That is, we found an inscription on which a name was mentioned. Actually, it was about land grant inscription, and a name mentioned was Prabhavati Gupta. Prabhavati Gupta. And who was she? She was the daughter of the Chandragupta II. So Prabhavati Gupta was a woman. Yes or no? So Chandragupta II, he ruled around at around 370 AD to 415 AD. So the daughter of Chandragupta II was Prabhavati Gupta, and she commissioned an inscription. She commissioned on her name an inscription, copper plate inscription, which reads that she was giving actually her own land. Her own land. This is very important. Her own land to some Brahmin or Acharya or teacher. Some person name was there. So what this actually tells us? It tells that because she was a queen, Chandragupta II, she was the daughter of Chandragupta II. She was married into Vakatakas, another dynasty. Vakatakas who ruled the western India. She was married into a Vakatakas family. And then she became the queen. Because she was queen, she was given the access to the land. So, this rule of women not having the access to the land or resources, it was only for common people put by the Brahminical section through the legal text. But it was not true for everyone, because rural elites, even the political elites like Prabhavati Gupta, who was a woman, but still she has the access to the land. She even granted the land to some other body. So that what it tells, legal texts are not uniform to everybody in the society. Legal texts, the legal rules are not same to everybody, or not uniform to everybody. For poor, they are meant for, but for the elites, they are not applicable. This is what we have to learn from this Prabhavati Gupta inscription. Now, Now the next important, very important question: why actually the lands were granted by the kings to some other people after 600 BC, especially after 0 AD, in the second half of ancient Indian period? Why? Why the kings were giving the land as grant to some people? If you study the inscriptions, if you examine all the land grant inscriptions which are survived till today, most of them, we will find a pattern that most of the land grants were given to only two people in the society. One is to the religious institutions. Religious institutions, for example, Hindu temples, for example, Jaina monasteries, or some other, religious monasteries. So most of the land grants were given to the religious institutions and also given to the Brahmanas of the society. So to whom the kings were actually giving the grants? That is the question. So the land grants were given to religious institutions, most of the land grants, and also to Brahmanas. Why? Here comes the question: why only to religious institutions and why only to Brahmanas this land grant practice was started? Why kings were giving lands to Brahmanas? Why kings were giving lands to religious institutions? So what this tells? Religious institutions, that means it tells king was actually probably belonging to that religion, or this is the one choice. King was directly belonging to that religion, so that he is giving the land to that religious institution to propagate that religion. This is one choice, one option. Another option could be king was of one religion and the people were of another religion. So to get the legitimacy of the people, probably king would have granted the land to other religious institutions, which was not once his own religion. To gain the legitimacy of them, other religions, all the religions, perhaps he was giving the religious institutions the land grants. This was one reason. And to explain the reason that why actually kings are giving land grant to the Brahmanas. Brahmanas, why? Here comes actually important point, that is, after 200 BC, after Mauryans, if you see, 200 BC, who ruled in the complete India? In the deep south, Cholas, Pandyas and Cheras. In the northwestern, the Kushanas. In the western, that is Gujarat region, Shakas. And in the western and central India, Shatavahanas. So different dynasties, different kingdoms ruled different places in the India. After 200 BC, one common point among all these Cholas, Pandyas, Cheras to Kushanas, Shatavahanas, Shakas was they are not traditional Kshatriyas. Actually, till 200 BC, people and even the Brahmanas were, writing the rules that only a Kshatriya should become the ruler. That was there since latter Vedic period. So they were habituated, even people were habituated to Kshatriya rulers. But after 200 BC, you will see Shatavahanas, you will see Cholas, Pandyas, Cheras and Shakas, Kushanas. All of them are non-Kshatriyas. So that is perhaps the reason, because they are non-Kshatriyas. For example, to say Shatavahanas who ruled from 200 BC to 200 AD in this period. I'm sorry, excuse me. So Shatavahanas, actually they are Brahmins by themselves. So you just imagine, I am a Brahmin and one of my fellow Brahmin, if he became ruler, will I accept? Should I accept? So normally some friction exists between the Brahmanas and the Brahmana origin rulers like Shatavahanas, and here comes the appeasement politics. So because Shatavahanas are Brahmins, because the other orthodox Brahmins stop them or offer the resistance to their rise, because they are only habituated for Kshatriya rulers, they don't accept the Brahmana rulers. To gain the legitimacy of the Brahmanas, to gain even the legitimacy of people, the kings, maybe the Brahmana king or maybe some other king, Kushana king, Shaka king, Chola, Pandya, whoever maybe he is, the king was actually giving the land grants to Brahmanas because
These are the people who actually laid the rules. Only Kshatriya should become the ruler. So they will actually oppose a Brahmana king. So whenever he gives land grants to the Brahmanas, they would be appeased. Perhaps that was the reason, to appease the Brahmanas, to appease the other religious people. Normally, kings have started the giving land grants to the religious institutions and Brahmanas. So normally these Brahmanas, whoever received the land grants, now they became landowners in the villages. That means now they became elites. Even the religious institutions started growing in their size, and they also became an economic centers. Yes or no? So this was happening. Now a question. This is a general discussion which I had till now, that why land grants perhaps would have given. Why actually kings giving the land grants? If I have to tell, there is another reason. Not only to appease the Brahmanas, not only to appease other religious people, there are two other reasons why actually kings are giving land grants. One popular reason, explained by most of the Indian historians, positive Indian historians. They say actually kings started giving land grants because to extend the agriculture to non-agricultural land, non-cultivated lands. Sir, because this is a period of agricultural revolution, 600 BC, we have seen lot of strategies have coming up. Kings thought large area of land should be coming under this agriculture. But who should do that? Somebody should do that. Somebody should start cultivating the uncultivated lands. And for that reason, kings were started giving land grants to Brahmanas or some other people, so that they may extend the agriculture to the non-agricultural, non-cultivated lands. For example, there is a forest. A king would give forest one village has a land grant to a Brahmana. What he would do? He would make it into an agriculture land, and the people residing in that village, which was given as a land grant, they should work as agricultural labor in that land, so that agriculture can be extended to a non-cultivated land. So to extend the agriculture, perhaps kings started this land grants. This is one other reason which can be explained. But the most popular reason that why land grants were started is because the political power was weakening in this period. I mean, after 0 AD, I am saying, because kings were losing that ground base from the nobles, from Samantas, from the provincial rulers. So to gain the legitimacy of them, even from the strong Brahmanas, when the political power of the kings was on the weakening side, they started giving the land grants so that they can gain their allies and Samantas. This was another reason why a king would have probably had given the land grants. But reasons may be many, but ultimately what this land grants practice led to, it led to the creation of a new rural elites. And this is very important. Please listen. This new rural elite practice, developing of this new rural elites in the rural side or countryside, this laid the foundation for the next coming medieval India. And what is that? Feudal India, feudalism. What is feudalism? Feudalism like Zamindari system, Jagirdari system, Inamdari system, Mansabdari system. All these systems we would see in the medieval India. What we know as modern Indians was Zamindari system. We can have some sense of it. Jagirdari system, Mansabdari, you would know only if you have studied the Indian history. So this land grants practice led to new rural elites, and now this practice of new rural elites started. It is actually a seed which led to the next feudalism of medieval India. So this is the very, very important point to be understood. The seed for feudalism or medieval India actually laid in land grants practice of the ancient Indian period. Now, till this, it's okay. I think you are understood, right? Now,
why land grants actually started. As I have explained, the first reason is that political power was weakening of the kings. To gain the legitimacy of the Samantas, of the Brahmanas, of the allies, they used to give the land grants. This is first point. Second point, why the land grants were started? It is because to gain other religious support to the king, or to propagate a religion of king's own religion, or the third reason that why land grants were started, actually because to extend the agriculture to the non-cultivated lands. So these are perhaps the reasons that why land grants were started. Now, these are the reasons that why land grants were started. So let me tell you, we discussed all these things, but let me tell you one single point. Land grants practice was actually believed to be started by Shatavahanas. Land grants practice was believed to be practiced by Satavahanas. They were the first. Why? Because Satavahanas, as I have explained, they are Brahmins by themselves. So when they came to rule, when they came to power, normally the orthodox Brahmins won't support it. So that might be one reason. Another reason might be because they are Brahmanas, they started giving land to the Brahmanas, their fellow Brahmanas. And that led to the land grants practice. And ultimately, throughout the not only Shatava, it started with Satavahanas, but throughout the India, throughout the subcontinent, we have seen this practice of land grants. And ultimately, it led to new rural elites that brought a lot many differences. The differences already started from the uneven benefits of technology revolution in the rural society. They were still sharpened by this practice of land grants. So this is what happened between the 600 BC to 600 AD. And just for a smaller conclusion of this class, that what actually we discussed today, if you see the rural economy, what we discussed. In the starting of the class, what we discussed was how the countryside was changing. It was changing. The relationship between the king and the subjects were not good. It was strained because of the taxation. We discussed, and then the popular perception among the people of the rural society was against the kings. It was not in favor of the kings. They were thinking king as a wicked. How could we know that? Through the stories we could know that. For example, Jataka stories, for example, Panchatantra stories. We discussed one example, Gandatindu Jataka, in which a wicked king goes in disguise to the people and he listens what they are thinking about the king. They say that tax collectors are like robbers. The robbers are actually looting them in the night time, whereas tax collectors are looting them in the daytime. This is what they believe about the tax collectors and the king. So most of the people, because of this taxation, they fled the villages, they abandoned the villages and they went into the forest. And some of the rural sections, they did not abandon the villages, they did not flee, but they responded to the change in the polity, that is the demand of taxation. They started changing the way of production of agricultural produce, and ultimately some strategies they developed. For example, iron plowshare technology, or the hoe technology, or the transplantation of paddy technology, or the irrigation technology. So these strategies ultimately led to the increased production, and so that they are capable of paying the taxes. This is how some section of the rural society fought, and they responded to the crisis of political levying of taxes. And this, because of these technologies are not evenly distributed in the society, lot of differences came in the rural society. Like you would see landless agricultural laborers in a village, and you also see smaller peasants in a village, and you will also see the large land owners in a village. So these differences were sharpened because of the uneven benefits distribution in the society of technology. So these are the bottom changes which were happening in the ancient rural economy. But to add the misery to the already burdened people, common people in the rural side, to their economy, the kings were even started a new practice from 0 AD called as the land grants practice, and that led to the new rural elites in the countryside. And ultimately, this laid the foundation for feudalism in the
medieval India, land grants practice. And probably it was believed to be started by Shatavahanas because they are Brahmins. They are not Kshatriyas, traditional Kshatriyas. So normally to appease the fellow Brahmanis, they gave the land grants. And why land grants were started? I have said lot many reasons. One reason was to appease the other religions. Another reason was to appease the Brahmanas and Samantas and allies. Another reason was to extend the agriculture to the non-cultivated land. And next reason was because political power was on the weakening side. Kings wanted to show themselves as superhuman, as a divine power. They wanted to just give the lands like that, so that people would, feel a king as a god. So that nature, monarchy was on the rise because they want to feel themselves as superhuman. So to satisfy that, kings would grant the lands to the Brahmanas and other religious institutions. So this is what the ancient rural economy from 600 BC to 600 AD. And in the next class, yes, before going to the ending of the closing of the class, in the description and in the comments box, I will place the today's lectures notes. Please go through that. Perhaps this is the first class that I was using the board, and even the weather is not supporting today because it was raining. So a lot of disturbance you might have experienced. I'm sorry for that. But from the next week, this would not be there, and I will be explaining you in detail and still more in detail the next coming concepts of Indian history till we complete it together. So the next class would be on the ancient urban economy. Till this point we discussed the ancient rural economy, and in the next class, in the same period, 600 BC to 600 AD, this is the period we are dealing with from the last three classes. We discussed first polity, and now today we discuss the rural economy part 1, and the next class we will discuss the urban economy. With this, economy portion would be completed, and after that we will move on to the same period but new domain of the ancient India. Okay, so till then please study and go through the material, and we will meet in the next class.
This is your SR. Thank you.
अथ श्री महाभारत कथा।